we want a distinct form because they are distinct entities. And the more humanoid, the worse it is in terms of confusing our subconscious psychological systems.
So I'm arguing from the perspective of the people making them. As in, if I was making the decision whether it to be some four-legged thing that I'm unfamiliar with, that I'm less likely to build a relationship with or allow to take care of, I don't know, might look after my children. Obviously, I'm not saying I would allow this to look after my children, but I'm saying if I'm building the companies,
the manufacturer would certainly
want to be.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, there's also what's called the Uncanny Valley, which is a phrase from computer graphics when they started to make characters in computer graphics. They tried to make them look more human, right? So if you, for example, if you look at Toy Story, they're not very human looking, right? If you look at The Incredibles, they're not very human looking. And so we think of them as cartoon characters. If you try to make them more human, they actually become repulsive.
Until they don't.
Until they become you have to be very, very close to perfect in order not to be repulsive. So the Uncanny Valley is this, like the gap between, so perfectly human and not at all human, but in between it's really awful. And so there were a couple of movies that tried, like Polar Express was one, where they tried to have quite human-looking characters, being humans, not being superheroes or anything else. And it's repulsive to watch.
When I watched that shareholder presentation the other day, Elon had these two humanoid robots dancing on stage. And I've seen lots of humanoid robot demonstrations over the years. You've seen like the Boston Dynamics dog thing jumping around and whatever else.
Yeah.
But there was a moment where my brain, for the first time ever, genuinely thought there was a human in a suit. Mm-hmm. And I actually had to research to check if that was really their Optimus robot, because the way it was dancing was so unbelievably fluid that for the first time ever, my brain has only ever associated those movements with human movements. And I'll play it on the screen if anyone hasn't seen it, but it's just the robots dancing on stage. And I was like, that is a human in a suit. And it was really the knees that gave it away, because the knees were all metal. And I thought there's no way that could be a human knee in one of those suits. And he says they're going into production next year. They're used internally at Tesla now, but he says they're going into production next year. And it's going to be pretty crazy when we walk outside and see robots. I think that'll be the paradigm shift. I've heard Elon say this, that the paradigm shifting moment for many of us will be when we walk outside onto the streets and see humanoid robots walking around. That will be when we realize.
Yeah, I think even more so. I mean, in San Francisco, we see driverless cars driving around, and it takes some getting used to. Actually, when you're driving and there's a car right next to you with no driver in, and it's signaling and it wants to change lanes in front of you, and you have to let it in and all this kind of stuff. It's a little creepy, but I think you're right. I think seeing the humanoid robots, but that phenomenon that you described, where it was sufficiently close that your brain flipped into saying, this is a human being.